Retro Warriors episode 401.
Woo.
As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by resident old bastard Chris Saturn.
Hello.
Saturn, the hand motions I make when I introduce the show have gotten so elaborate that I don't think we ever can record in person because it's turned into a whole interpretive dance.
Yeah, you would knock me across the room with it.
And so
We just need to get you little flags to hold while you're doing it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So that I can signal.
Yeah, so that you can conduct in air traffic while you're at it.
We don't really have any housekeeping. This has felt like kind of one of the more normal recording evenings we've had in a long time.
Yeah, but the last couple weeks have been a weird rush of everything. So
it has been. It's been strange. I know you're still dealing with the kind of the tail end of your father passing.
Yeah,
and
we had the
my wife
week.
just quit her job, and my kid is on spring break, and it's just
all exciting, right?
It's all awesome stuff. I told her tonight, I was like, you got 2 days left of spring break, and she lost her mind. And I was like, why did I say that? That was stupid. What I should have said was nothing.
Yeah.
Yet here I am saying, please stop screaming at that pitch. It physically harms me. As far as my week, I did finally complete Vampire Survivors.
Nice.
I had yet to ever sit down and complete the collection.
Yeah.
In the game, or unlock Queen Sigma, and she really does kind of break the game.
Yes.
And she breaks the game in such a way that depending on the level you're playing, it does physically break the game, and you have to force quit it.
Yeah, especially if it's on endless mode.
Yes. So it is. There's in Dwarf Fortress, on the wiki for Dwarf Fortress, there's a list of ways your fortress can end.
Okay.
And it's things like digging too deep and monsters come out. You run out of resources.
Right.
And one of them is called death by computer. And death by computer is when your fortress gets so big and complicated that your computer... it becomes unstable and you just can't even open your fortress anymore. And then you have to abandon these poor dwarves to some, imaginary graveyard. And I didn't know that Vampire Survivors also has a death by computer end condition.
I had not encountered that myself.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let me rephrase. It has never actually frozen, but it has gotten so slow at times that it's taking 10 to 15 seconds for 1 second in-game time to pass.
I haven't had that happen before.
Yes, I don't know if it's the builds I'm using or the levels, because to be fair,
and
the second I unlocked...
on too?
Oh, I'm on...
Steam Deck?
Yeah, I'm on Steam Deck. I've also played it on PC. It gets equally slow. Now, what I've been doing is I'll set it down and just let it go and come back 20 minutes later, and it will have completed whatever task it was on.
See, the issue I've had, I haven't had the timer slow down, and I've gotten up to like 2 or 3 hours past. Mm-hmm. But I have had it drop down in frame rate so bad that you can barely see what's going on. Like it's down to like 1 or 2 frames a second, even on the Series X or on my PC, which it shouldn't be. But man, does it drag.
And to be fair, if for anyone out there listening is like, oh my God, this game sounds like a mess.
No,
if you're doing this stuff, you have already so thoroughly completed and broken the game that it doesn't matter. You're just effectively goofy. This is the Vampire Survivors equivalent of, that time that you figured out how to turn on debug mode in Skyrim. So you're like, I'm going to spawn 10 million watermelons just to see what happens. Like, I would of course it's going to fuck up.
I would also say it's the equivalent of playing an old NES or Super NES or Genesis era game and somehow getting outside of the boundaries and still killing everything. Yeah. It's basically that.
So I did finally finish it, unlock everything. I've unlocked every version of everything. I am missing one creature from the bestiary.
Me too, and it's from the DLC, and I don't know what it is.
Mine is number 120, I think it is. And I think it was in the boss rash level, which I think I may have completed earlier. Because that level in particular gets really bogged down, so I set it up, and I gained a few levels, and then I just set the deck down and walked away for a while till it said I was completed. But man, what a good game. It's so fun.
I actually just replayed through the DLC on my phone because they released it for mobile now. Mm-hmm. So I got to also replay some Vampire Survivors this week.
It's so much fun. It's
yeah.
just it's fantastic. What a fun, chill thing to play. I do. The only thing that I'm upset about now is that I'm out of content.
Right?
I really wish they would come up with some kind of, I don't know, procedurally generated task or a daily goal or some kind of something.
Yeah.
Because once you figure out how to break it, you can so thoroughly break it basically every time.
Right.
That you're yeah.
And especially once you've unlocked everything. Once you've bought all of the power-ups that are permanent, the game is very, very easy.
Yeah. But man, what a ride.
Seem to keep releasing new content for it. So
yeah,
we're inevitably going to get some more eventually.
And that's why it's taken so long to actually sit down and go through the unlocks. I knew that once I did, I'd be sad.
Right.
I'd be like, okay, well, now I'm out of things to do.
That's why I've played through it on 3 platforms now.
Yeah, I still haven't. I did get the gem from the Bat Country level, and I still have not evolved Mortasio into his big giant arm. So I need to go sit down and do that.
Oh, you should, because it's cool looking.
I guess I could go for I've not ever looked at achievements, but I could go for achievements. I might not have them all yet.
Did you not do that?
No, I just did all the unlocks in the unlock menu. I don't know that I've actually gone and looked at the Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then
the unlocks menu is the achievements list.
I did not realize it was the same. So then,
Yes.
I guess I've gotten everything.
Yeah.
It's complete. I completed it Saturn.
Yep. For now.
Yeah, for now. But yeah, that ate up a few days of my time. Oh, I did have a housekeeping thing I wanted to mention. I forgot about it. We started a tabletop role-playing channel in the Discord. Well, I say we. I. We have the Board Game Barbarian server, but because the show is basically, I don't want to say on hiatus, the show is over. That server is, there's still some people hanging out there, but it's much more active in the Retro Warriors server. So I wanted to say, we've started a tabletop role-playing server. I'm going to be running some games.
Channel,
so if you want to, channel. So if you want to come play D&D with me, then you may do so in our Discord.
Yeah.
So just wanted to put that out there. Saturn, what have you been playing?
So aside from Vampire Survivors, finished Like a Dragon Ishin. So the way that I have played all of the Yakuza games so far is as soon as I can do sub-stories, I will. So I try to knock them out as early and as quickly as possible. And because of that, I spent, give or take, 70 hours on the first 5 or 6 chapters.
Okay.
Because I was doing everything and doing all of the gardening and all that stuff that I could. And then I just kind of like walked through the rest of the game and some extra stuff to do kind of presented itself to me at the end. Just some optional things in the last like chapter or two. And for some reason it was just, I was so burnt out on the idea of that grind that I was like, no, yeah. I'll just finish it for now.
Right. I'll come back to it later.
Maybe. So I did finish the story at least at some 80-ish hours.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And if I had ignored all the optional fluff bullshit, I probably could have done it in 40-ish. But yeah,
that feels high. Most, except for obviously Yakuza 7, the few that I've played, they've been 20 to 25 hour games for me.
And maybe they are. I do spend a lot of time just on the menu, paused, doing other shit in my house.
Yeah.
So that probably contributes to that time too. But no, it's really good. I enjoy the combat. I think the leveling is too slow. That is my biggest complaint. Is that it takes forever to level up, and even after having finished the game, in order for me to even get close to finishing any of my level things, would have required a ton more grind. And there's an achievement for getting a limit break, meaning it resets them so that you can fill them up again. So I can't imagine what grind it would take to do all of that.
Yeah,
just based on what I've done so far.
Is it because I feel I think I'm like halfway through each of my little things there. I'm guessing the second half exponentially slows down.
I don't know if it's exponentially, but it felt like it slowed down. It's probably just because I was rushing through at that point for the last half of the game. So I didn't
like. my free time playing Yakuza games, you're doing side missions. In that time, I'm doing just random combats, just running circles and doing combats.
Yeah, I was avoiding people as much as possible because I don't want the random grind. I'll hit some people en route to something just to get a some experience from it, but I don't want to just run around and fight for no reason. So
it's not for no reason, Saturn. It's to shoot people in their faces and kick them into the river.
Yeah, there's a lot of
that's the reason.
I do love that canonically Kiryu, or in this case Ryoma, has never killed anybody. And then in the game we see him constantly just stab people in the gut and then shoot him in the face.
Yeah.
And then
just point blank shoot a guy directly in the face 15 times, then throw him in the river.
Yeah, and then immediately afterwards, they're hunched over saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I won't do it again."
Yeah,
I know, I shot you in the face, right?
So, in the pantheon of Yakuza games, where do you put Ishin?
That's hard to say. Probably top half-ish.
Okay.
Better than 3, but definitely not as good as 0 or 5 or Kiwami 1 or 2.
So maybe the lower end of the remakes.
Yeah.
Not accounting for 5, obviously.
Right. Yeah, 5 is still just really good, even though it's not a remake.
Yeah.
You can fist fight a bear in 5.
To be fair, I feel like I've fist fighted a lot of large animals in Yakuza games.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, you can fist fight a bear in Ishin too.
I fist fought a tiger in one of them.
That's true. Oh,
I don't remember.
So in Ishin, there's these cards that you can get, and once you get your troops, right? Your troops are represented by cards, and these cards will have special abilities. And in the remake of Ishin, you can use them in any combat instead of just during your trooper missions. And one of the cards you can get is a tiger. And it just, when it charges up and you use it, it's just a fucking tiger mauls your opponent and does a shitload of damage.
But Ryoma has killed no one.
He has killed no one canonically.
The tiger did it. He didn't kill these people, Saturn. The bullets did. All right.
Sometimes they survive the tiger. But there was a
Could you imagine getting mauled by someone's tiger and then getting up and being like, yeah, I think I'm good to keep fighting. Let's keep going. I think I want to continue this.
So there was a boss battle that I got to where I don't want to spoil the story, even though the story is based on historical fact loosely. So all of the characters and rough events are all actual historical facts. So if you read a history book, you can see what all happens. Yeah, roughly.
But to be fair, it's also pretty granular Japanese history that most people in the Western world are not exposed to.
Exactly. People outside of Japan wouldn't know this. In Japan, this is as common as our knowledge of the Revolutionary War and all that.
Yeah. I remember I was in the Discord one day and someone from the UK said, "What do you mean you didn't learn about the War of the Roses?" And I remember going, "I don't even know what that is." I minored in history in college. I have no idea what that. I had to go Google it.
It was the time when Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses went to the Rose Bowl and started a war.
Started fighting people.
But no, so there is a boss fight where you have to fight a very significant historic political figure who is identified as such in the games. Like, this is this person who is in charge of all these things.
Right.
And then, like, as soon as I start the battle, I hit the button and he's mauled by a tiger. And so I immediately had to record this. I'm like, yes, Ishin, the based on a true story historical moment when this important political figure was mauled to death by a tiger.
Right. Classic.
Only he survived the tiger, so I had to sick the tiger on him 4 more times before he died.
Tale as old as time. Let's do the news.
Yeah.
First up, what? A free PC and Mac JRPG based on the 80s TV series The Golden Girls has been announced for release later this year for some reason.
Did you look at it?
No, why would I look at it? No.
So the dude who's making this had originally just made a joke image that was taking a scene from Persona and replacing all the characters with characters from the Golden Girls and making it look like Dorothy was evil and about to attack Rose.
Uh-huh.
And he thought it was so funny that he went ahead and made an entire game around this image. So it is like a Golden Girls meets Persona kind of game.
You know what? I'll say this. I'm more interested in their lives than I am the lives of any teenager in a Persona game. Right. So I'll put it out there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Now, this is a fan project, so hopefully it doesn't get hit with a C&D from Sony. I think that's who produced the Golden Girls.
Oh,
so
right.
We'll see.
Sony. Yeah. I don't know that I trust that it's not going to happen then.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that, but the trailers are still pretty great. I'm going to enjoy that one way or another.
Austrian court rules against Sony and EA in a case regarding FIFA loot boxes. And this is not the first time they've been ruled against for loot boxes. Wasn't it Belgium, I think?
I believe
specifically had some type of they ruled against them and that they had to change how they did them.
Yeah, and EA responded by saying, well, I guess we won't release FIFA in this country anymore.
Yeah.
Can't just fix the game.
Well, Saturn, how are you going to fix something when it being a piece of shit is a fundamental design element of the piece of shit that you've made?
The central pillar of the game is the shit.
Yeah, it's their third pillar. You got loot boxes, soccer, and shit. That's the three pillars of EA's design philosophy. Reports resurfaced showing that the Wii U NAND flash can fail from inactivity.
And there's some people were saying that it might not be specifically inactivity so much as they all just fail eventually. And if you're not using it, you're less likely to notice when it fails. Mm-hmm. So you just come back to it and it has failed. So it is still concerning. They do say that if you back up your NAND on your Wii U by hacking your Wii U and then backing it up, that you can restore that even if it fails.
So once again, piracy is the correct option. Yeah, it is the ethically correct thing to do to retain purchases that you have made.
Correct, yes, sir.
Because not far from now, you won't be able to re-download anything you purchased from the Wii U eShop.
Yep.
Because fuck our consumer rights, right? Am I right? Oh boy.
Well, don't worry, because the eShop is going to be closed soon anyway.
Yeah. Well,
within a couple of weeks.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Nintendo.
Yeah.
Difficulty options in Final Fantasy 16 will be locked behind in-game equipment. Naoki Yoshida says it's because being asked to choose easy difficulty hurts his, quote, pride as a gamer.
Yeah, we'd hate to hurt his gamer pride.
And before we discuss that, I want to say the next news piece because it ties into how I feel about this. Also, Final Fantasy 16 will be the first numbered entry to, quote, use the F word, which I assume is fuck. I hope it's fuck, because the alternatives are worse.
It's French.
This entire set of news items just makes it sound like the game's being produced by a 15-year-old.
Keep in mind.
Granted, mainline Final Fantasy games have been channeling 15-year-old energy since
20 years
Final Fantasy X. Yeah. But this
now keep in mind,
really sounds
I don't think he speaks English, so he probably didn't specifically put the F word in there, though he might have. That is a known word in Japan. But either way, the pride as a gamer, just
his pride as a gamer.
Now he did say there will be a separate story mode that you can play, in addition to the equipment that controls all of your accessibility options.
I like. In games have been phrasing it this way for a few years now. I'd say really for this generation. A lot of times easier difficulties are called story difficulties. The idea is like you just want to experience the story. You don't really want to get your ass handed to you. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to phrase it.
But at the same time, I have no qualms with picking easy.
Yeah, me either.
Or very easy, or easy-s. Now, I do get annoyed with stuff like Doom that's like, pick Little Idiot Baby Edition.
Right.
Like, okay, that's, specifically for Doom, because it's so stupid and over the top, it's kind of okay there. But there have been other games that do it in a more insulting manner.
Oh, yeah.
But just, I don't know, just the idea of, this is my gamer pride. Yeah. Like, man, that's Wow.
Now, I will say that because Yoshi P also produces Final Fantasy 14, right?
Uh-huh.
And 14 has a ton of boss encounters and instances and stuff that are just tough as nails, like really require expert execution. However, there's always a patch later that just undoes that and makes them easier, or adds in some equipment that makes it easier for new players, or allows you to get to a higher level so that you can
So
just
it's basically
walk through it.
timed difficulty.
Right. And I don't know if that's what he plans on with this, or if what he will ultimately do, but it has shown that he has been open to the idea of opening up the entire game to anybody who wants to play it, whether they can, retain their gamer pride or not. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping that in the end that will be the case.
I want to say I support the intent behind both of these statements.
Right.
That a diversity of difficulty options presented in non-traditional ways is often a good thing.
Right.
And games using more adult language instead of artificially restricting themselves, depending on the subject matter, is also a good thing. I'm in favor of both of these. It just is phrased in such an edgelordy way. It hurts his pride as a gamer. He's going to use the F word. It just feels so lame.
And Stranger of Paradise drops F-bombs left and right. Like, that game cannot stop saying fuck.
The reason I didn't play Stranger of Paradise is because it looks so stupid.
It really
because of how stupid the annoying edgelordy main character seems. Now, granted, maybe in the game he's not that bad. I don't know, but everything I saw was like, man, this guy seems so annoying.
It's pretty much that. The story in Stranger of Paradise was pretty annoying to me. The gameplay was kind of fun though. I heard the
gameplay was really good.
Yeah, I'll give it that. That was, and it's about to come out on Steam for a reduced price too. So maybe there will be a demo.
If you're an edgy 15-year-old, please write in and let me know if you're worried about your gamer pride or excited about the F words in Final Fantasy 16. I'm just curious. I'd really kind of like to know more about, like, I don't know, the gameplay.
Right.
Would be cool.
Hopefully there will be a demo before the game releases. Square Enix has been pretty good about releasing demos lately, so I am hoping there will be a demo in time.
And finally, Square Enix reports that sales for 2022-2023 holiday season have been lackluster and that they are redoubling efforts on NFTs.
Oh, boy.
And that their upcoming NFT game will have 10,000 characters.
What does that mean?
It means that they're going to procedurally generate 10,000 random characters and sell them as NFTs.
Right. And when nobody buys them or uses them, then what?
Is this the same sales report that they were coming out and basically saying, hey, Forspoken looks really bad right now, but it's mostly because of last holiday season. All of these mid-tier games underperformed.
Right, yeah. So they spent way more than they should have on Forspoken, and then they under-advertised it while also kind of rushing it out the door. So it's...
Yeah, I've heard that it's kind of jank.
Yeah, the reviews I've seen have been like, this is a fine game. It's not a full-price game.
Right.
And also the writing is apparently kind of bad.
I've also heard that.
I heard that the writing feels like a made-for-TV movie that debuts on the CW.
I mean, look, there's an audience for that, Saturn.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not.
I don't think it's us, but there is one.
It's not the people paying $70 for a PS5 exclusive game.
Yeah. So... what annoyed me was they came out and they basically were like, yeah, all our stuff last year, the Valkyrie Elysium and Tactics Ogre and all these other mid-tier games, they just underperformed. Well, first of all, let me tell you, Square Enix, let me inform you of the situation. You refuse to release a definitive version of any game you ever fucking make. Even Tactics Ogre, it's a great version, but it's not quite definitive because of the visual options.
And then,
second of all, Star Ocean sounds like a fucking train wreck.
No, it was actually pretty solid. One of the guys on Digital Foundry gave it Game of the Year last year.
Well, there you go. Yeah. I just remember you complaining about it for like 3 episodes in a row and me being like, this sounds like a mess.
Yeah, I'm still going to complain about it because it was not for me.
But here's my thing: is their real issue is Forspoken. Forspoken is what has tanked their sales.
Right, that's the one that cost them so much.
This was the poor decision they made, and they're offsetting it onto these smaller mid-tier projects that are fan favorites.
Yeah. Also, they took all of these smaller mid-tier projects and they loaded them into a shotgun and they just blasted them at the holiday season last year. It was like 6 games within 3 months, I think.
It was a bunch. It was a whole bunch.
Because you had your Tactics Ogre and your Valkyrie Elysium and Star Ocean, and you had Diofield Chronicle. You had Dragon Quest Treasures.
Triangle Strategy too, didn't it?
Triangle Strategy, yeah, that was also during that time.
Forgot about that game.
So that's at least 6 games that were all in a really short period of time.
And most of them are lengthy RPGs.
Right.
I and then they want to come out and be like, yeah, Forspoken looks pretty bad, but really the issue is all these mid-tier releases. Well, no, the issue is, 1, you don't put effort into mid-tier releases. 2, you don't put marketing into mid-tier releases.
Right.
And 3, they're the first things you blame whenever your other projects fucking take a shit.
Yeah. However, I did read that they have purchased Luminous Productions again, which was the company that made Forspoken. Mm-hmm. They had spun off that company after Final Fantasy 15 because they were like, they can stand on their own now. And then after Forspoken failed, they were like, maybe not. I'm just going to merge that back in.
Yeah. So it's just the Avengers situation all over again. Yeah. It's them putting too many eggs in a big AAA basket that nobody... Look, I saw the trailers for Forspoken. I was like, I don't know, it looks cool. I'll wait and I'll see what happens, whatever. And then I waited, and everyone's like, it's like a 7 out of 10 kind of middle of the road game. Right. And so I said, all right, well, I'm not going to pay $70 for that.
Right.
It was just the same thing they did with Avengers. They put all their eggs in this basket. Nobody seemed very excited about it.
Right.
The previews were negative, and then it came out, and people still were not very excited about it.
Well, also, Avengers tried so hard to be a live service while not being that great of a live service.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, I really wonder if Square Enix kind of in their heads were like, we can give up Tomb Raider to get a cash influx because we have Forspoken coming out. And that's going to be the new...
Man, I hope not. I hope they were thinking Final Fantasy 16 and not Forspoken.
Well, but Final Fantasy was already a known quantity. Right. You know, I'm thinking like... Because Forspoken's
to replace Lara Croft with this new character.
Yes.
Oh, man, that would be a mistake.
Yeah, because in my head, I'm like, well, it's third-person action game, female protagonist. It checks a lot of the same boxes as Tomb Raider, just on paper.
Such a bad idea.
And I'm not saying this is what they were thinking, but in my head, I'm like, I did hear this. The best praise I heard for Forspoken were people saying, hey, this is a great game that I think the sequel is going to be fantastic.
Right. If the first one gets one.
The first one, kind of, I don't know, you could skip it. But they were like, there's some cool ideas here that would be awesome in a really good sequel that hones a lot of this.
Right. If they get to that point.
True. But, it's right on the tail of them selling Tomb Raider. And in my head, I'm just like, this does check a lot of the same boxes as Tomb Raider does. It makes you wonder.
I noticed earlier today there was a Square Enix sale on the Xbox store. And so it was the first time that I'd seen a Square Enix sale that didn't have Tomb Raider and Deus Ex on it, which made me sad. Yeah. So I went to go look up Tomb Raider in the store, and it's also on sale independently. But its publisher is listed as Crystal Dynamics now.
Oh.
So the Xbox store has updated all those listings to list Crystal D as the publisher for those games now.
Now, Forspoken is on sale right now. It's already on sale.
Correct.
It's
I saw it was like
$46
off on Steam or something.
And these reviews are low. Wow. Let's get to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
We've dunked on Square Enix enough, and now let's dunk on Commodore. Because why not? This week we're talking about Discovering the Amiga Part 1.
And I have to say real quick before we get started on this,
yes,
I'm really enjoying this episode format. Because this is the second time we've done one of these. We did the Master System a few months ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know we're going to run out of these systems that I didn't get a chance to play when I was younger before long. But I'm really enjoying them just because it feels like a look into an alternate dimension where...
It feels... Doesn't it?
Just like the other side, what they were experiencing. So it's like looking into the past, but not the past that I was aware of. It's really neat.
Playing the Amiga has been like if I went to DOS Elementary School and then we went to the gymnasium of a different elementary school, that's what the Amiga is. They're the different elementary school where it's all kind of the same but also kind of different.
See, I started with the C64 before I moved to DOS, so it feels like how when you leave elementary school and you go to different middle schools.
Yeah.
It's like I went to the DOS middle school, but my friends still went to that Amiga.
Yeah,
middle school
you were lined up to go to the Amiga middle school.
Right.
You just were on the line.
Right.
You're a block over in your neighborhood, so you got.
So I'm finally catching up with those friends, and I'm like, your school's fucking weird, guys.
As far as scope, this is going to be a two-parter, implied by the fact that I said part one earlier. I don't know why I had to clarify that, but here I am. We're going to look at the hardware, the background of the Amiga. We're going to talk games are all next episode.
Yes.
And Saturn wrote that we are dumb Yanks. So this will be a U.S.-centric look as usual for people outside of the U.S. that maybe still don't realize microcomputers and stuff were not a thing here.
Well, they were, but not to the extent that they were in the rest of the world.
They were as much a thing here as like Palm Pilots were. Like, there's a couple years there, it's like, maybe it's going to be a thing, and then it just died.
I know a friend who had 3 Atari STs.
Oh, my God.
She got one for herself and one for each of her kids.
Like, growing up, I never even saw a computer that wasn't an Apple II or a DOS machine.
Well, you were a little late for a lot of the microcomputers.
I was later. I was born 88, so I did kind of miss the boat on it. But I mean, I never even saw them. I never heard people even mention them.
I remember seeing them in stores. I still remember that era when you would see the Amigas and the Atari XTs and the whoever else still had one on the market by that point. I think TI had bailed by then, but Tandy was still around and.
But all this to say that. I mean, literally nothing about Commodore. I mean, at all. Because, like, when we did, like, the Sega Master System, discovering that system, which was a blast, I know Sega, and I know Sega properties, so it wasn't totally weird to me.
So you could play some Shinobi or something.
Commodore? Man, I have no idea. The first time I ever touched a Commodore was when you brought that one over to my house that one time.
C64, yeah.
I completely and utterly missed the boat. By age, by geographic location, by all sorts of different vectors. Right. So this is as exotic to me as like the MSX or like the FM Towns. We
should do MSX.
We should do. I was thinking that when I was working on this Amiga episode, I was like, man, we should do the MSX because there's I think there's 2 models of MSX 1 and 2.
There's more than 2.
Oh no, there's more? How many did they make?
I think there's 3 major revisions. And
look, I grew up in America. You get your thing, and then you get the super version. So there's the MSX and the Super MSX, and then that's how it works. So
Super MSX 2 Turbo.
Super MSX 2 Turbo. Initial release, the Amiga 1000 came out July 23rd, 1985, which is 3 years before I was born.
That was originally just in the U.S., too. It took a couple of months to go overseas.
It was discontinued in 1996. The Amiga line was, with the Amiga 1200 and 4000T being the final, models sold on the market, and it had nearly 5 million units sold in that 11-year span. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. You have to remember, PCs were not as ubiquitous then.
But man, that's low.
Not everybody owned a computer during that era.
I mean, how many Apple IIes did they sell? How many C64s did they sell? Like, what are these sales numbers like compared to these other computers?
First of all, the Commodore 64 was the world's best-selling computer. The Amiga was not.
Okay, well, do we know, I know that this is me, asking the moon of you, but do you know C64 lifetime sales off the top of your head? Because I have no metrics for this. I would love to know what the best selling of all time is.
I don't know off the top.
To gauge where 5 million is.
So I'm looking here, the C64, this is the weirdest scale, sold somewhere between 12.5 and 17 million units.
Okay.
But granted, the C64 was also on the market for 12 years.
What? That's only a year more than the Amiga.
And it launched in 82.
That's only 3 years earlier.
Yes, it was discontinued in April of 94.
So it had a similar-ish time frame.
It had a lot of overlap.
There was a lot of overlap, and it sold 3 times better than the Amiga.
Correct.
Man, Commodore must have been fucking pissed.
we'll get to
Could you imagine in 19... Man, all right, yeah, we will get to that. I'm just imagining them in 1996 like, why the fuck did we make this thing? The Commodore is... the 64 is still selling.
Yeah.
What the fuck are we doing with this shit? You made how many different models of Amiga? Why?
Oh, we'll get to all of that.
First encounters. My first encounter was Googling what an Amiga was a few years ago and going, that looks fucking weird, and then never... that was it. And then emulating Amiga games. I don't know... if you've never used an Amiga, then understanding how to emulate an Amiga is like learning a different language.
Really
I feel like I'm fucking decrypting the Rosetta Stone of microcomputing to get this shit to work.
Yeah, I've got a section later on about emulation specifically, and I have all kinds of concerns to file there. But yeah, it is weird.
Yeah. What about you, Saturn?
So yeah, I remember like seeing them in the store, but not like a display model, just like the sign for it. But I don't remember ever seeing an actual unit in person, and I didn't know anyone with an Amiga because we were a C64 family. Right. And by the time we upgraded our computers beyond C64, it was late Windows 3 era. So we just jumped straight to that.
Did you go through a phase where your parents were like, why are we going to buy a computer? We already have computer 1. Why would we buy computer 2? We have a computer.
No. Their answer was, why do we need a computer when we have a Commodore 64 and a typewriter? You can type your school papers. You got the typewriter.
I guess my point is, because there was this era of consumer electronics where people were kind of trying to break out of the mindset of, and this was an issue for them, a lot of markets, breaking out of the mindset of like, well, I have a refrigerator. Why do I need another refrigerator?
Right. And
yeah, that refrigerator like is a little nicer and has some better features than my refrigerator, but my refrigerator still works fine. This iterative design philosophy.
Yeah, and the electronics industry especially was iterating much more quickly than people were used to. People were used to buying something as an appliance and it would last for decades. And then suddenly your TVs and your VCRs and everything needed to be replaced over time, but they still lasted a good long time. And then we got to computers. And
then it's also hard because like upgrading from a black and white to a color television, that upgrade is so readily apparent the second you look at it. Computer upgrades, it's like, well, it looks a little better. Well, it runs a little better. Right. And you're like, yeah, but... And you know, to a person that doesn't use computers, like it's still just the text on the thing, and I type, and then you know.
And my cousins had the C64 monitor, so that you could get the high resolution picture out of it. Let me tell you, that thing ran, I think, at 192p. It was a good picture you get on that Commodore monitor.
I swear, I had a computer monitor that I used as a TV for a while. And I don't remember what brand it was. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it was straight up, it was a monitor. It had all the different adjustment knobs down under the edge. It looked like a computer monitor. And for whatever reason, I used it as a TV for years. And I in my head, it was always a Commodore brand, but I don't. I have no idea.
Because the Commodore monitor was just an RGB television. And it had the dials at the bottom to adjust the signal and everything, and I believe it even had a tuner on it, so that you could just plug in an antenna.
Yeah, so I'm man, I wish I still kept that thing. I was so dumb to get rid of that. Anyway, let's talk development of the Commodore Amiga.
So, just real quick history of Commodore here. The company was founded back in 1958 by Holocaust survivor Jack Trammell, as well as Manfred Kapp. Trammell is the one we're going to be talking about mostly. And anybody who knows anything about the history of either Commodore or Atari knows who Jack Trammell is.
I've heard the name many times despite not knowing anything about the man.
Right. And we discussed him on our Atari episode some like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then in 82, they released the world's best-selling computer, the Commodore 64.
Is that still true?
At the time, the world's best-selling computer.
Well, because I know I suspect
has to
that
have been surpassed by a model of Macintosh at some point.
Yeah, well, in my head, I'm like, well, it means single model. I mean, there was the Commodore 64, you know, and I'm sure it came in a couple slightly different forms, but they were all pretty much the same machine.
There was a revision of it that looked different, but it still had the same hardware inside.
So I'm curious what like single model like MacBooks and stuff are selling by comparison.
Surely one of them has hit 17 million by now.
I don't know. But don't call me Shirley.
Anyway, so also in 82, the same year that the C64 came out, a guy named Jay Miner, as well as some other staff from Atari, left the company to form a computer company that they were calling Hi-Toro, which they later renamed to the Amiga Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And their whole goal was to develop a game console that could be upgraded into a computer.
Okay.
So basically, you would plug into your TV, and then you'd plug in a disk drive and a keyboard and maybe some sort of memory expansion, and boom, it's a computer.
Not too dissimilar to the extremely early Western selling points of the early versions of the NES.
Right, yeah, similar to that.
Because there was that very early version where it was kind of sold as like this higher end electronic.
Right.
Before they would put a fucking robot in there and said it was a toy for kids.
Right.
You know, there was this model where the idea was that, no, this is like it can be upgraded into a computer system.
Right.
It looks very sleek and nice and, you know.
So that was their goal. They had codenamed it Lorraine, and they just needed money for it. So they had...
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
We have all these great ideas. We just need huge amounts of liquid capital.
Basically,
you just get that. We have all the rest, though.
So first they got some venture capital, like you do, and then they used that to start developing software and hardware for the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision in order to gain more capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then they were still running out of money. Like, they could not continue to pay for this system they were developing. So they went to Atari because they knew people at Atari because they all came from Atari.
Yeah.
So they went to Atari and they looked for a loan. And this was during the era when Atari was owned by Warner Brothers. And so they were like, look, we just need some money to finish developing this thing. And Atari came to them and said, okay, we will front you $500,000 to finish making this thing. But we get 1 year exclusive access to the hardware when it's done. So Atari would basically publish it. They would have full control over it for at least a year. And then Amiga can sell it to somebody else if they want to, do whatever they want.
Right.
And it also said that they needed to have a working model ready to sell by the end of June of 1984, or they would forfeit their entire company and technology to Atari.
Okay.
So now they have a deadline, but they have their money.
Right.
So, excuse me. In January of 84, Trammell was dismissed from Commodore because he told
5
them,
months before they were supposed to have this thing ready to go where they forfeit everything.
Well, this was Commodore was still separate from all this. So this was just
right. In my head, I'm conflating.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
So now
Amiga's talking to Atari, and then shortly before this happens, over at Commodore, Trammell is dismissed.
Yeah, he's kicked out because he has been insisting that the C64 is not good enough, and they absolutely need to make a 32-bit computer.
I love where his head is at, but time will dictate that was wrong. No, the C64 was in fact good enough.
Yeah, and they didn't even have a 16-bit computer yet. And he was like, no, we need to jump straight to 32-bit. We have to have a 32-bit computer. It is a thing that needs to happen. And so because he was annoying everybody, they kicked him out of the company, and he formed a new company called Trammell Technology. And it's basically his last name, but he removed the I from it because he was sick of people mispronouncing his name. So
why doesn't he just change his name then?
I don't know. I don't have the answers to these things. So the new company approaches Amiga.
People will still pronounce his name wrong.
Yeah, but they would pronounce the company correctly.
Okay. All right.
So he goes to Amiga and he wants to buy them. But Trammell said he would only wanted the tech and not the staff. So he would buy the company and immediately fire everybody. Was his proposal to them.
What a proposal.
He would give them a load of money, but he would not keep any of the staff. And they were not interested.
To be fair, they're up against their deadline. So, I can see it being a situation where he's like, hey, maybe they're sweating this deadline and they want out. And
they were not interested in losing their jobs. They wanted to be involved in this whole project. They were passionate about it. So instead, Trammell bought Atari from Warner for $240 million. This was right after the video game crash, too. And anybody who remembers Atari history of this era, Trammell immediately turned them into a computer company to focus on the Atari ST and XT. So he was excited about that possibility of the better computers. I think those are only 16-bit computers, though, so he never got where he wanted there. But then the guys at Amiga didn't want Trammell to acquire Amiga due to that contract with Atari that said that Atari would automatically acquire them.
Right.
So they were desperately looking for another buyer that wouldn't fire them.
Mm-hmm.
And they found Commodore.
The company that Trammell just left.
Yes.
Because they didn't have a computer like the Amiga.
Right. So Commodore purchases the Amiga Corporation for $27 million, including paying $500,000 to Atari to pay back that prior loan and cancel the contract. Of course, there was a bunch of legal issues there, but eventually they
and I'm
sorted it
sure
out.
Trammell tried to block what he could.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he fought it real hard.
Yeah. So Commodore ends up with the Amiga.
Right.
That Jack Trammell wanted so bad, and they move forward with the release of the thing.
Yeah, so, well, they couldn't at first. So they had finished it in July of 84.
Uh-huh.
But because of all the litigation between Atari and Commodore, they couldn't sell it yet. So it was just sitting completed in limbo for a year while other companies were releasing new computers.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, Apple.
And this is a time when a computer sitting in limbo for a year it's a death knell.
Oh, yeah. So during this time, the Mac comes out, and the Amiga would have been the first platform with a mouse standard, the first platform with a graphical user interface.
Mm-hmm.
But the Mac came out. So that was some poor timing on their behalf. But they did finally release it in July of 85, and they called it the Amiga 1000. And it had 256 kilobytes of RAM, and it sold for $1,295, which adjusted for inflation is $3,614.
What was the Macintosh selling for?
I think it was more than that, if I remember.
Okay. Okay, so it's a budget option. Well, budget-er.
However,
I mean, the Commodore 64 is the real budget option.
Right. Oh, the C64 was probably close to 300 by that point.
Yeah.
However, the Mac had a built-in monitor.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted the monitor for the Amiga, because you could just plug it into a TV, but if you wanted the monitor so that you could support higher resolutions, it was an extra $300, which adjusted for inflation is $837.
Oof. So you're pushing $5,000 in 2023 money.
At least $4,300-ish, give or take.
After tax and handling fees.
You're probably getting pretty close to
else.
$5,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Man.
So, that's just for a computer. That's how, and that was considered a not a high end computer because IBMs were already selling for $2,000 to $3,000 at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So computers have definitely come down in price.
Yeah.
So, however, unlike its competitors, the IBM, the Atari ST, and the Apple Macintosh, the Amiga could run multiple applications at once, which sounds like such a basic thing in 2023. But
it doesn't sound that basic when fucking phones have for years been unable to run more than one application at once. What's that? Oh, my phone is as powerful as most laptop computers, but I can only run one full screen application at a time, and split screen is just kind of like fucking jank and shitty. Oh, how strange.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 1985 when we had this figured out.
Yeah. So it could do multiple apps. Also, it had stereo sound and could produce over 4,000 colors.
Oh my God.
The Mac was still monochrome at the time.
Do you remember back in the day when how many colors a thing could display was like a deal?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this has over 1 million colors.
And Amiga was
like, is there even that many colors? I mean, 4,000 seems like all the colors already. How many colors are there?
And when you look at the high-res, high-color imagery made on the Amiga, it looks pretty good even today.
It does. It does look real good.
And I mean, the IBM at the time still had the CGA adapter in it, so it could produce up to 4 colors during games.
See,
and one of them was
sounds
black,
like an
and one of
adequate
them
amount
was
of
white.
colors. I mean, how many colors are there? Like, there's 16 crayons in a box. So 16 colors sounds like enough.
Did you ever play any DOS games on CGA mode back then?
Oh, yeah. I've played plenty of DOS games with CGA mode.
Where it was just blue, pink, black, and white, and that's it? That's your entire palette?
Yep.
Ugh, it's so bad.
Anyway.
So, they were ahead of that. So there was big fanfare at release. There was this giant launch party in New York with Andy Warhol and shit. He was apparently a big Amiga fan. He spoke up for years.
I did kind of get this vibe that the Amiga had this sort of like artsy kind of bend to it.
Oh yeah, it was very popular in the art crowd.
Okay.
And also in the television and film industry. I got some notes about that here in a little bit.
Now, I know that these days we kind of associate that more with Mac, but
Right.
at the time, I feel it feels like the Amiga was kind of capturing that, like, this is for creatives kind of thing.
Especially early on, especially because of its ability to produce color that other platforms couldn't. So that was definitely a thing, but it didn't sell very well, especially at first.
Mm-hmm.
And the software companies, they weren't really supporting it as much as other competitors, and the game studios didn't have much available at launch, so the launch was kind of underwhelming.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, the Commodore's marketing department had pitched it as if it were a business computer, and they outright refused to sell it to the same toy stores that were selling the C64. And they also didn't sell it to any of the business-oriented electronics retailers either. They were only selling it at like generic electronics retailers.
So like Circuit City and Sears.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. I don't know if it was at Sears specifically, but that kind of store is where you could find it, and it was always with the business equipment, the higher end stuff, even though it was very cheap compared to that other business equipment.
Yeah.
But it was also possibly too expensive to fit in with the toy stuff too. So maybe they had a point, but clearly it didn't work. It was not the correct marketing approach.
Yeah.
So by the time we get to 87, they wanted to compete with the Atari ST, which was selling for a lot less than the Amiga was. So then they released the Amiga 500, which was a budget model of the Amiga for only $699, which adjusted for inflation is $1,847. Is
that all?
Budget computer. They also at the same time released the Amiga 2000, their advanced model, for $2,395, which adjusted for inflation is $6,331.
Holy shit! Yeah. What did the Amiga 2000 do that the other ones did not?
I had some more RAM. And I don't remember what else it had.
Oh my god! $2,395 in 1987.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So despite these new models made available, it continued to struggle to keep up with the sales of their competitors or the sales of the Commodore 64, which is the painful part.
Which is cheaper than the Amiga 500.
Yes, by a bit. By 87, the C64 was $199 with a $100 rebate.
Oh my god.
So it was a cheap machine.
That's damn near free.
Right. So then they came out a few years later in June of 1990 with the Amiga 3000, which sold for $3,379, which is nearly $8,000 in current money.
So what I don't understand is they're like, all right, it's not selling. We need a higher end model.
Yeah, that was their thing, was the more expensive IBMs were selling, but they couldn't sell.
Because they're IBMs.
Right. That was the problem.
Because IBM has the business connections to sell the units. Right. That's IBM's thing.
And I think that somebody at Amiga was like, well, we've got the budget model. We've still got the 500. The 500's still on the market. So we've got a budget model.
So is the C64.
Right. Well, they were like, well, we want to enter into this business category. We want people to see us as a serious, legitimate business computer. And they just could not breach that market.
Yeah.
So then... In 1990, they do this weird thing. They release a device called the CD-TV.
Okay.
It looks like a VCR, but with a CD-ROM drive on it instead of a VHS slot. It was basically an Amiga 500 with a built-in CD-ROM drive and a remote control that could be plugged into your TV and used as basically a console with minimal games. It sold for $1,000. And they intended for it to compete with the Philips CDI. It did not.
You have to be really low to be like, man, we just wish we could get that Philips CDI money. You got to be real low down on the totem pole for that to be in your business meeting.
In 1990, the electronics world really did think that Philips had an idea on their hands.
It did. And the CDI sold all right, but I don't know that it sold well enough.
No.
I don't know.
No, but the thing is that companies like Commodore were like, but what if it ends up selling better? We need to have our alternative on the market right now.
Yes.
And
And
that was
their alternative.
Yeah.
Man, I just can't even imagine, like, the business meetings of them sitting behind these closed doors being like, all right, well, the 500 isn't selling, so obviously
No, the
people
500
don't want...
was selling okay, but not in the US.
Okay. Well, even then, they're like, all right, the 500's selling, but people are still buying the Commodore 64. Well, yeah, because it's the same company. It has better software support. There's more titles available for it. It's a more well-known quantity.
And it's dirt cheap.
And if you're going to be spending, if you're in the budget computer market, you're probably going to go for that. And so they're like, all right, well, our answer is to keep making more expensive computers.
Right. And they kept making more expensive computers.
Who is this for? Who is it for?
Yeah. They just kept releasing new machines. In 92, they released the 500 Plus, which was the same as the 500, but even cheaper. And also it didn't work with a lot of games that worked on the Amiga 500.
No. Yeah.
They also released the 600 and the 1200, which were both considered upgrades of the 500. They cost a little bit more than what the 500 did by that point, but about the same as what the 500 used to cost. And they were much more powerful. So those were nice upgrades. Those started to see some real success overseas. And then they also released the 4000, which was their most powerful and coincidentally most expensive model yet.
I wonder, and this is just a shot in the dark, if in 1992 people were really at a consumer end able to differentiate between different models that are just numbers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
like when you're talking to a dad that's in a Sears department store trying to buy a computer, and they're like, well, you got the 500, the 500 plus, 600, the 1200, the 4000, you got the 2000, 1000, and 3000. Those are earlier models, though. I imagine him just being like, give me the Macintosh. Yeah, that one that's just the one word. I want that fucking one.
And the thing is, they released them all so quickly back to back to back to back that a lot of the retailers did still have old stock of the previous models. So there was a stack of various model Amigas just hanging out waiting for somebody to buy it.
It really sounds like what they should have done is released a basic platform with upgrade modules, which is kind of...
Well, that's what the 3000 and 4000 are.
Oh, God.
They are fully upgradable. The 4000, you can even replace the CPU in it from a Motorola chip to a PowerPC chip, the same kind that iMacs were using at the time.
Yeah.
So you can make an Amiga 4000 a pretty dang powerful machine for the 90s.
For like $10,000.
Well, at the time, you had to wait until that stuff was available. A lot of those upgrades didn't become available till after the platform was discontinued.
Well, then there's not much point then. My point is they should sell just the Amiga, and it is the base system, and it should have been one SKU. It's basically the Amiga 500, and then you can buy these upgrade modules.
All of the models did have upgradability. You could add more RAM to any of them. You could add a CD-ROM drive to any of them. So even if you had just gotten an Amiga 500, you could have stretched that thing this entire run, and it would still run some software at the end. Even if it doesn't run everything in the best possible mode, it'll still run things. So there were upgrade paths. But then we get stupid.
Then we get stupid?
Oh, we get extra stupid. So... at this point, people aren't buying Amigas because they're afraid that there's just going to be a new one around the corner any minute now. So why buy one now?
I can't imagine why they would think that.
Right? So then they released the Amiga CD32, which was a consoleized version of the Amiga 1200. So it looked like a game console. It only ever sold in Europe, Australia, Brazil, and Canada. They tried to release it in the US, but they were sued. And they couldn't sell it in the United States. So people were importing it from Canada to discover that it's just an Amiga 1200 and it just plays Amiga games on your television.
Comes with a gamepad.
Yeah. The same gamepad that the A500 Mini comes with.
Yes, which I like that gamepad.
It's a gamepad. The original one doesn't have as many buttons as the one that
I believe when you took it out, you handed it to me and you said you can play with this piece of shit if you want.
Yeah,
and I did. I liked it.
It's passable.
I thought it was good.
So then they finally released the final hardware version of the Amiga, the A4000T, in 1994, pretty shortly before Commodore went bankrupt, and then there were no more hardware Amigas, especially not from Commodore.
What a tale.
Yeah.
What a tale, Saturn.
And during that time, they did sell nearly 5 million units.
At some point, they must have thought that, hey, if it's expensive enough, people will assume it's good.
I think that was their...
That's got to be... That's the only thing I can think.
Thinking.
That's got... They'll be like, look, if it's $10,000, someone's going to be like, why the fuck is this $10,000? It must be amazing.
Right.
Because every consumer is a TV
Idiot.
Dad. Let's talk reception then.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, it did have some positive reception in the art world and the TV and the film industry.
Mm-hmm.
The A2000 and the A4000 especially were used for a long time in the TV and film industry. I found a notification that the special effects in shows like Max Headroom, Sequest DSV, and Babylon 5 were all produced on Amigas.
Oh, so we know who to blame now.
Also, apparently NASA had a machine that was running on Amigas until like 2009.
Oh my God.
Just because they didn't want to redevelop the software for a different computer, so they just kept these Amigas running forever.
Could you imagine, like, you go through years of military service, you join NASA, you've been at it for 15 years, you get to go to space. This is your fucking moment. It's been a 20-year journey.
Right.
And
like,
finally,
here's an Amiga 3000.
And they put you in a space shuttle and you boot it up and it's Amiga OS. And you're like, wait, what? And then it's like, like, oh, shit.
I don't think it ran the space shuttle itself, but it was tracking something.
Let me dream, Saturn.
But yeah, aside from its use there, it never hit the anywhere near the level of success as the C64, especially here in the US.
Yeah.
The big issue cited by a lot of the magazines that I saw, because I read some stuff from when it failed, and they said that it was a lot of it was the lack of compatibility with major PC software. It took them years before there was a version of Lotus for Amiga.
Yeah.
Which was a problem because that was very successful at the time. So it was lack of software support coupled with high cost meant that the business users weren't going to go for it, and the cost was high enough to turn away the casual users. So you just didn't see.
I mean, like at the time, it feels like a lot of computer costs were like, yeah, it's $2,000, but
yeah,
I can run my business on it.
Right. And
it also plays game. And I've heard a lot of stories of people that are like, yeah, we got this computer so my dad could run his business,
right.
or so my aunt could do the books for the company that she does the books for, right. in using Lotus
but I could
or whatever.
play Jazz Jackrabbit on it.
But it also plays Jazz Jackrabbit. Yeah.
So
one of their epic mega games.
Right. So this is one of the saddest facts that I saw. So it did do better in Europe. Specifically the UK and Germany. Commodore says that both of those two countries, UK and Germany, it sold 1.5 million Amigas each in those two countries. So that means that 3 million of the nearly 5 million sales was between the UK and Germany.
Yeah.
And it was sold in like 40 countries.
That has got to so heavily skew UK and German computer owners at the time. I wonder how many people in those two countries grew up being like, yeah, the Amiga, it was like a big deal.
Right.
And then it's like, no, it wasn't anywhere else.
And we see that even in our Discord. Several of the users from the UK were like, oh yeah, Amiga was huge here at the time.
Yeah.
And it was. A lot of the game developers for consoles from that era were like, well, yeah, we make the ones that were in Europe. They would say, well, we make our games first for Amiga, and then we port them over to Super Nintendo or Genesis or whatever, because that's what they have there. So
right. Let's talk hardware before we get into legacy.
Yeah. So the system ran off a Motorola X68000 CPU, which is the same kind of architecture as the Genesis or the Neo Geo or the early Macs. And most of them could be upgraded, like we mentioned, various internal and external expansions. You can even replace the CPU with a newer CPU if you wanted to upgrade it, get it to run faster. Like we mentioned, the chipset was very advanced at the time of release, but then VGA and SVGA came to PC, and that advantage disappeared. The sound was also relatively advanced for PCs of the era, but again, sound cards on PC starting to upgrade. Sound Blaster came around.
As soon as Sound Blaster hit, it was a moot point. Yeah.
Right. They did, Commodore had released some expansion devices, especially early on, that added some level of compatibility with IBM PC software and hardware, but it was based on the original 8086, and then they released one for the 286, and they never released any others after that. So it's still just running 286 hardware, kind of, on an Amiga. So there was all kinds of compatibility things.
Right. So you can badly run older software on your extremely expensive Amiga.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
If you want to run the oldest version of Lotus 123 for DOS, you're in luck, buddy.
There you go.
Have I got a $4,000 computer for you? And then there were other expansions, video and sound upgrades, CPU overclocking boards, modems, Ethernet adapters. There's even somebody has made USB controllers for the Amiga that you can install in your old-ass Amiga to run USB devices on an Amiga.
You can plug in your Xbox 360 controller.
Let's not go that far.
Amiga games.
We can't do USB 2.0. That's too much. And then there were Amiga clones released after the fail of Commodore. Many of them ran off of PowerPCs. And in fact, later model PowerPC Macs, the later iMacs before they switched to Intel, can be turned into clone Amigas running Amiga OS 3 or 4.
Oh, well, there you go. You can just go buy an expensive Mac to emulate an expensive Amiga.
Right.
Let's talk legacy. Where is the Amiga name now?
That's an excellent question.
So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, the rights to the Amiga name specifically was bought by a company that is called Amiga Incorporated. They named themselves that specifically to buy the rights to the Amiga. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's all they do. They are just a rights holder. They don't produce anything. They don't do anything. They just hold the rights. And they licensed the OS to a company called Hyperion Entertainment, who went on to release a whole new Amiga OS, Amiga OS 4, in December of 2006.
Oh my God.
And they
oh my God, I ran Amiga OS 4.
Oh no.
I just fucking remembered. It was around the time I graduated high school, and I was in some BSD forum.
Oh yeah.
And some guy was like, yeah, man, they just released Amiga OS 4. And I was like, what the fuck is Amiga OS? And I ran it for like a weekend, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And then I totally forgot about it.
Yeah, running it on something other than a PowerPC, it has compatibility with almost nothing. Like you can't run any Amiga software.
Nothing worked.
No. But if you install it on a PowerPC, like an old Mac, you can do a lot of stuff. You can even run old Amiga software on there.
Really?
And they continue to update Amiga OS 4. The most recent update was in early 2021. And Hyperion also has released updates to Amiga 3. The most recent update came out March 8th of 2023.
So they're still updating Amiga OS, but it only runs on Power. Well, I mean, it'll run on other stuff, but it mostly runs on PowerPC.
Yeah, mostly PowerPC, and you can still run it on the old Amiga consoles too.
True, but like, is there any newly available hardware I can buy?
Yes, Amiga Inc. and Hyperion have been selling platforms they call Amiga One, which is a PowerPC computer that you can purchase that is specifically an Amiga clone. It basically just looks like a desktop computer, and it's, roughly the power of a 2005 era Mac.
Which is
you can buy one for $3,000 if you really want.
It's $3,000?
There's a $2,000 model.
No, it is not, Saturn.
They're also been out of stock for like 3
years.
years, so...
Holy shit. So they continue their legacy.
Yeah, they say they're making Amiga OS 5 as well, but there's not been any updates on that in like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Let's talk about the mini console then.
So yeah, there was the A500 Mini. It was released by Retro Games, which is the same guys that made the C64 Mini. It was released in April 2022 in Europe and May here in the US, and it's adorable.
It is. I had one pre-ordered and I canceled because I didn't have the cash like when it came out, and I just never went back to it.
But you got to play on mine.
I did, and it's an experience.
Yeah, it's fine. It does come with a retro style mouse, but it is an optical mouse. It just has the appearance of the original Amiga mouse, and it comes with a CD32 style gamepad that you seem to enjoy.
I do. There's some careful phrasing.
Yep.
That you seem to enjoy for some god-awful reason.
I left that part out. And it also has 25 games built into it, and you can load additional games via WHD load.
Yes.
And they even include instructions on their website on how to do so, which is very nice of them. And it honestly, once you can find the WHD games to load on there, they run great. I've had great experience. I've been playing a bunch of games on it in the last week or so, and they play pretty well.
On that front, let's talk emulation.
Now, do we want to do this now, or do we want to put that off for the next episode?
I don't know. I guess we're a little over on time. We could save emulation a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that would kind of be getting us into game territory. So
bridge it pretty well.
You're right. Let's save emulation. We'll stop on the Mini.
Okay.
Which is still available. It's still on Amazon.
Yes,
you can still go buy. It's in stock right now. Yep. So you know.
And the company that makes the retro games, in addition to the C64 Mini, they released the full-size C64. They also released a VIC-20 clone, which is full-size. And apparently they are in consideration of releasing a full-size clone Amiga. And that sounds exciting to me.
Well, it's going to be $3,000, Saturn, so I hope you're fucking ready.
Right?
I feel like
full price.
I feel like you're going to open the top and it's just going to be like an old shitty Mac stuffed down inside of a plastic case.
Just a Raspberry Pi in there.
Just VHB taped to the bottom of a plastic shell.
Just some electrical tape going to a floppy disk drive.
As far as final thoughts, the Amiga is confusing and weird to my American brain.
And all PCs of that era are kind of weird.
They are. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah, if we were to look at any of them in this level of granular detail, they would all have some bizarre marketing and bizarre stories behind them. But this is also basically the tale of Commodore's downfall.
Right, which is tied so in such lockstep with the Amiga itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't think entirely it is the Amiga's fault.
No.
As much as the joke is, ha ha ha, look, they fucked up the Amiga when they could have just kept selling the Commodore 64 through to the mid 90s.
They were developing a Commodore 65.
Oh.
They were working on a machine called the Commodore 65 that was supposed to be the successor to the Commodore 64.
Why would you call it that?
I don't know. It was just a 16-bit Commodore 64 instead of an 8-bit.
Why would you call it that? That implies that there were 63 other Commodores that you came out with.
Well, there was the VIC-20 and then the 64, and they skipped a few.
I guess you can't call it the Commodore 2 because people will be like, well, I've already got the 64th one. What do I need the second one for?
Clearly, they should have gone Nintendo's route and gone from the Commodore 64 to the Commodore Cube.
There you go. Or just call it the Super Commodore.
Yeah.
Then my dumb American brain can understand it, and everything will be fine. Yeah. It's bizarre, but like you said, there were a lot of crazy expensive computer platforms of the time, and this wasn't even the most expensive one.
No.
It was just kind of one of the more poorly marketed ones in the U.S.
Right. Yeah,
which is kind of its downfall.
Yeah.
And speaking of poor marketing, if you want to experience our poor marketing, then you go to patreon.com/Retro Warriors, where you can listen to Talking Wizards or read along or uncut versions of this show, or you can just give us money and not listen to any of that stuff. I don't care.
Right.
As long as we get the money. That's all I care about. Please,
or if you want your name in our Discord to be a different color.
This is true. You will get an orange name. Which I refuse to give to anyone who is not a patron. So don't even ask me to make your name orange, because I won't.
What if they give you money separately?
Yeah, you. Well, it's actually it would be complicated. I don't want to make that promise. You can also make one-time donations. Maybe you like the show, but you don't want to do the monthly subscription thing because you're like, that's stupid. Everything's a monthly subscription, including underwear and soap and Netflix and everything else. If you go to our link in the show description, we have a coffee, and you can just buy some coffee. Yeah. Just send us a few bucks, or buy some merch if you want to buy some merch. Yeah. We don't. I was looking at it and we make so little money on our merchandise that we've never actually had a payout. I think once a year, Redbubble is legally required to pay out what they owe us. Yeah. But it's nothing. But we enjoy seeing your Retro Warriors merch. So send us pictures and stuff if you're drinking your coffee out of a Retro Warriors mug.
Somebody did post a picture of their mug the other day.
Wearing your Retro Warriors t-shirt. Someone bought a Retro Warriors messenger bag.
Nice.
I'm super jealous of that. But yeah, We're also on the socials. Just click the link in our thing. It's got all the stuff, and then I don't have to tell you any of our usernames because I don't know them. Sometimes it's Retro Warriors, sometimes it's RW Podcast, sometimes it's Retro Warriors Podcast. I can't keep up with this stuff.
It's confusing, Justin.
It's extremely confusing.
I know.
And I don't understand it, and I'm trying to figure the social medias out. But man, it's tough and dumb.
Yeah, I saw a picture of somebody posting to Twitter from an Amiga while I was researching all this.
No, you did not.
I did.
What web browser does Amiga OS run? What can you run in that?
You can run Netscape.
I'm sorry. Hold on. As in Netscape Navigator?
Correct. Yeah. And there's some fan-made browsers for Amiga OS, especially for Amiga OS 4. Remember, Amiga OS 4 didn't come out until 2006.
True.
So, there's web browsers.
It's got that Web 2.0 access.
Let's not go that far.
2006 was 2.0, wasn't it? Was that Web 2.0?
Maybe. I don't know.
Which version of the internet are we on now? Do people call it the web still? Young people out there, do you call it the web? Is that a thing that still happens? Or is it just internet now? I feel like everyone just calls it internet.
Looks like there's a port of Firefox to Amiga OS.
Oh, that's good. That's good. You can run a good browser. Probably an old one. Probably the 2006 version of Firefox.
Right.
Anyway, we'll be back next week with more Amiga stuff. We're going to be talking games.
Yes.
So if you rush out after this episode and go buy your $3,000 Amiga clone and you're like, what games should I play? Well, you just wait.
Yeah. We'll have some for you.
And you'll know after next episode.
Yeah.
We do want to thank the following patrons for their kind contributions before we get out of here, starting with Craig C.
And Chris R.
Puff Puff Please.
Neil Hayes.
Blackened.
John Fry.
Edward Majewski Jr.
Brian Guido Hassan.
Robert Vieira Jr.
And freecodecamp.org Quincy Larson.
Are all the patrons we want to thank for their kind donations, and we want to thank you for listening.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for listening to us tell you how much Amigas used to cost. Anyway, thanks so much. We'll be back next week. And as always, let us cling together.